Views expressed in this episode are those of the guest and not necessarily those of myself and the Tristan Law Show. Welcome to the Tristan Law Show, where I introduce you to the personalities in and out of the pro wrestling ring. The unique part is you don't have to be a pro wrestling fan to enjoy this podcast. If you don't believe me, well, I guess you've got to stick around until the end to find out. I'm Tristan Law, and I hope that you've hit the subscribe button and that you like what I'm doing, because I'm doing what you like. If you're listening in Apple Podcasts, don't forget the 5-star rating and the review. It lets Apple and other listeners know that this is really, really cool. Hey, I want to know that you're right here with me this episode, so take a screenshot of this episode and tag me on Twitter and or Instagram at The Real Big Tris. You can also tag the show on Instagram and Twitter at Tristan Show. But hey, you have to make sure that your account is not private, or we'll never know that you tagged us and we can't reshare it. Welcome back to episode 15, and this episode is just in time for Veterans Day. If you're listening after Veterans Day, just pretend it's still Veterans Day. If you're an international listener and have no clue what Veterans Day is, here is the extremely short version. In the United States, Veterans Day is a national holiday dedicated to the veterans of our military, and joining us today is US Marine and pro wrestler Sgt Cash. Sgt Cash and I talk about why he enlisted in the Marines. He tells a few stories of his time in boot camp. He talks about the yellow feet and his time traveling the world with the Marines. We talk about his love for pro wrestling, how he adopted the name Sgt Cash while serving, and much more. This is a fun interview, and I know that you'll definitely enjoy it too. Last week, there seemed to be a technical defect with episode 14 featuring the goddess Shouty, Karen Bam Bam, that when the episode posted, only the first 6 minutes played. It was annoying to try to fix, but at this time, whatever the issue is, it no longer lives there. So be sure to listen to her episode right after this one. It's an excellent one. Thank you so much for listening. Do me a quick favor. Subscribe, and if you listen to my voice on Apple Podcasts, go in and write a review and drop me 5 stars, please. If you've already given me 5 stars, go in and write a review, because I love to hear what you think. So stand at attention, because when I get back, I have pro wrestler and US Marine Sgt Cash with me. I'm Tristan Law, and this is the Tristan Law Show.
Hello to all of you Tristan Law Show podcast listeners. This is Frank Mandolini. You may not recognize this voice. I am the Italian podcaster who talks about the business side of wrestling. Yeah, I know, it's quite niche. But if you look for last minute wrestling podcast on all of your social media and wherever you get your podcast, you'll be amazed to find interviews with people such as Rob Van Dam or Matthew Gregg from Botchamania and many others, so you get to know many aspects of the wrestling business that normally you don't hear in wrestling podcasts. Because let's face it, who wants to hear another guy talk about Monday Night Raw? Yeah, me neither. So guys, go to lmwpodcast.com or search for LMW Podcast everywhere in the interweb. And remember guys, this is Frank Mandolini from the Last Minute Wrestling Podcast, and you stay safe.
Welcome back to the Tristan Law Show. That's right. Who else would it be? It'd be me, Tristan Law. But like I said before the break, I am not alone, and I want to introduce you to my next guest. Hey, my next guest today is a US Marine Corps veteran. He's a pro wrestler, and if you ask me, I think he's an all-around nice guy. And at this time, I'd like to introduce to you one of my friends in the professional wrestling business, Sgt Cash.
Thank you for the intro, Tristan. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Hey, it's a pleasure to finally have you here. I know we had a little logistics thing that we had to do just to get you here, but I'm glad that you're talking to me in your brand new palatial mansion that you have overlooking the Hudson River.
Oh, absolutely. Sgt Cash needed a little bit more greenery, as we can see in the background, a little bit of foliage to get that nice homey type feeling.
How's the quarantine been treating you and your family? Everybody's been safe, wearing their mask. How's that been going for you?
Quarantine is tough on everybody. I myself have spent time and during rough times overseas. For my family, it's a little bit different. A couple of kids, the girlfriend who's, not quite used to such harsh conditions. Thankfully, knock on wood, everyone's staying out of the doctor's office. Everyone has been nice and healthy. Definitely can't complain along those lines. And honestly, I'm taking advantage and spending a lot of time with the little ones, getting to train with them because obviously with the gyms being closed and whatnot, we all, I think us as wrestlers all look to where are we going to get that physicality, that training. And I tell you what, having 5 kids crawl all over you, that'll keep you in shape.
So you're a US Marine veteran, and before I get into that, I've been told prior by other people that I can't say that somebody was a Marine because once a Marine, always a Marine. So please set the record straight for me, please.
This is very true. It is actually in the order. One commandant of ours, the name escapes me right now, general basically said, there are no such thing as former Marine. I normally, myself, I will refer to a Marine I will refer to someone as a Marine who's no longer on active duty. So a Marine veteran is fine. Veteran is fine. As far as the Marine Corps goes, there are no former Marines.
What were the times that you served, and what was your highest rank?
My times that I served, I was active duty from 1995 to 1999. I was also recalled to active duty when September 11th happened from 2001 to 2003, where I was honorably discharged as a sergeant.
Thank you very much for your service. I can say 100% that you are the first Marine that I have on the Tristan Law Show. Thinking back to 1995, what sparked your interest in joining the U.S. Armed Forces?
I come from a military family. My father himself, he was an Army veteran. My grandfather, he was an Army veteran. My uncle was the one Marine veteran. And to be quite honest, when I started thinking about going down that road, I think my uncle was probably more excited than I was when I told him I was contemplating joining the Marine Corps. Unfortunately, my father passed away when I was very young, so I never got to have that little banter with him about him being in the Army and me being in the Marine Corps. I can say that he's definitely been looking down on me, and he's definitely gotten me out of a lot of scrapes and kept me breathing today.
Aside from the Marines, did you consider any other branches of the armed services?
I looked at the armed forces, obviously, when I was reaching the end of high school and I was considering college. And I actually did do 1 year of college before I decided to do the armed forces.
What'd you go for?
It was actually something that is completely unrelated to what I do now. I was a double major in music performance, if you can believe that, and pre-law. Because actually my father, in his civilian job, my father was an attorney.
Oh, okay.
So I felt, I was going to carry on the family business, so to speak.
So you're saying that with your music production or performance, that means you can sing? Go ahead, sing for the Tristan Law Show listeners.
Oh, no. No singing. I was purely, not many people may know this about me, but I still am to this day a big jazz fan. And I played saxophone for about 9-10 years, along with other instruments for a couple of years. My father himself was an instrumentalist, so I definitely got my musical talent from both sides. But jazz was always a passion of mine, smooth R&B. And when I was a little kid, I always thought a sax was one of the coolest instruments around.
So what do you think about Michael Bublé? You ever heard of that guy?
I've heard of him. I'm more old school, Wynton Marsalis, Branford Marsalis, Gary Mulligan. Michael Bublé does have his talent. I'm not going to deny the guy that. But again, I go for the originals. I like old school type stuff.
Back to the original question. So what other branches of the armed services did you consider aside from the Marines?
I didn't really consider any other branch. I said to myself, if I'm going to make this decision to join the armed forces, I was really going to jump in both feet, so to speak. Like I wanted the full, this is going to be a military experience, not taking anything away from the other branches, although We all knock on each other at various points. We all rib on each other. But I always felt that if I was going to do it, I was going to go for the hardest challenge possible.
You see, for me, I wanted to go to the Coast Guard. I really wanted to go to Coast Guard so badly because I was like, I can go to like another branch of the armed services and I could see the entire world. But why see the entire world when I could see my country first? Like, I do not have any reason in my mind right now to say, hey, you know what? I think I'm going to go to Alaska. If I was with the Coast Guard, I would have had a chance to go to Alaska. Or, I would never wake up one day and say, you know what? I think I want to go to Guam. Like, I know Guam is out there somewhere in the water, but, I wouldn't go. But because of the Coast Guard, I probably would have gotten the opportunity to do that. However, my only issue is that I couldn't swim. I still can't swim. Because I can't swim, you see, my issue is that I watch too much Baywatch, and I used to always hate when they used to drown back in the day. And, like, for me, that kind of, like, psychologically messes with me. So I'm like, well, I'd have to wake up extra early to learn how to swim. So sometimes I get mad because I didn't do that, because I know I would definitely be in a different position right now.
I'll tell you what, even though Coast Guard, I have a couple of buddies who are coasties. They can get into knee deep in some serious stuff. But a funny anecdote, since you wanted to mention swimming in the military, because obviously the Marine Corps has their own, I believe, water combat training. I'll never forget, because myself, as far as my heritage, I'm Puerto Rican, and I have a lot of island boy in me. I love the water, loved it since I was a kid. Always been a strong swimmer. When I was in the Marine Corps, we did our water combat training. One of the events that you do is you have to jump from a 10-foot tower in full camouflage utilities and backpack. You have to dive into the water feet first, and you have to traverse the length of the pool while wearing a flak jacket as well. Everyone hasn't had the experience of wearing a flak jacket. Dry, I'd say a flak jacket's probably a good 15, 20 pounds. When that thing takes on water, you might as well be wearing lead, because I'll tell you what, I was trying to dog paddle to that other side of the pool, and I sank like a damn rock. And in the Marine Corps, they won't let you, it's not like I need help. Oh, someone's going to jump in. They'll wait till you go under, and they'll watch you go under. I'll tell you what, it was the one time in my life I could say, I just might drown. I'm right there.
You were just like ready to check out.
Yeah, I was like, oh boy. I was like, I'm going to be one of those guys.
You see, one of the things that I realized too is that I think that when it's our time to check out, to like when you know that something's going to happen to you and you can't help yourself, I think you become at peace with it. And I remember working at a cell phone store in Newburgh, New York, which is a stone's throw away from Stewart's Air Force Base.
Yes.
I never forget one of those big airplanes. I think they're like B-52s or B whatever's, really big. B stands for really big. So I remember it flying over the building and the walls are just shaking. And we're all looking at each other crazy. And we're all standing up thinking, that the plane's going to come through the building. 9/11 was still kind of fresh. So I'm standing up and I'm getting ready to run. And I'm like looking around. I didn't know which way to run. I just sat down. I said, well, God, if that's it, that's it. And everybody just laughed at me because, I just gave up. I'm like, hell, I can't save myself. We're all dead. But so that famous bus scene that we see in movies where the drill instructor hops on the bus and pretty much says, your ass belongs to me and the United States of America. How true is that? And did that happen to you?
That is 100% true. Can't speak for the other services, even though, full disclosure, I do have my stepdaughter. She's in the Navy now. My nephew just went to the Navy. But the way we do it in the Marine Corps is you will get dropped off in Parris Island in the dead of night, probably around midnight, 1 in the morning, and no sleep. And you're not going to sleep for that whole night either. And that first experience with the drill instructor, that is absolutely true. They will hop up on that bus and they will shout to the full capacity of their lungs for you to get your ass off that bus and onto the yellow footprints. Every Marine knows the phrase yellow footprints. And if I had to pick one movie, because you get the question time to time, how real is this movie to the Marine Corps? If I had to pick one movie that was tried and true to the Marine Corps experience, I would probably have to place that on Full Metal Jacket. The movie Full Metal Jacket is 100% accurate about how Marine Corps boot camp can be.
When all that happened to you, like what was the thought in your mind? So it's midnight, you get dropped off on Parris Island, right? And you're sitting on the bus, so like, okay, walk us through your mindset. So you're on the bus. What did you expect?
My mind was racing because that bus ride is silent. It's not like there's chatter on the bus.
So they tell you guys to be quiet, or you're just quiet because everybody's nervous?
Oh no, they tell you to be quiet. There was no talking, there was no nothing. It was a silent. You're sitting there on a full bus with a bunch of guys you have never met before, kind of sitting there in your thoughts. You know, at that point, it hasn't been so harsh. There's been some harshness, but really only a fraction of what you're about to step into. At that point, there's equal parts of, you know, butterflies of what's going to happen. How's this going to be? Am I going to get through it? While there's fear, there can be fear. There's also a sense of, you know, I want to see what happens next.
But at that time when you're on the bus, like there's no buyers, there's no return policy. Like it's done. Like that sale is already final.
Oh yeah, you've put your name on the dotted line. You've raised your right hand. You've made your oath. The only way you're going to go home is if they break you.
So okay, so you're on the bus. The bus gets to Paris Island, which is in North Carolina, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
No, I believe South Carolina.
Okay, South Carolina, and now the bus stops, and you see the drill instructor get on the bus. Where were you in the bus? Were you in the front, the middle, the back? Where were you on the bus?
In the middle, right side.
So you're in the middle, right side. Bus stops, door opens, drill instructor walks in. First thought through your mind, go.
Just seeing his countenance, just feeling his presence, this is about to get real. And it's about to get real quick.
And the drill instructor yells, hey, your ass belongs to me in the United States of America. Get the hell off the bus. How fast did you run? Were you the fastest thing on 2 feet?
So I could have climbed over people. Just the force of that man's voice. I think we all were trying to climb over each other. It's like, okay, I'll get off the bus.
Obviously, you eventually finished out boot camp and you did good. But what's the biggest lesson you learned by the time you finished boot camp?
And I think this is a lesson that is a very valuable lesson to not only any military member, but honestly anyone in life, is you really do not realize what you are capable of. Full disclosure for anyone that doesn't know me, even though I am a wrestler and even though one of my favorite things to do is come off the top rope, I myself am afraid of heights. Mm-hmm. Now, the drill instructors knew this, and one of the things you go through in boot camp is called the confidence course. And as its name implies, the course is intended to build confidence in you.
Right. And
in order to do that, most of those obstacles are at a minimum of 20 feet off the ground. So it's essentially climbing one end, navigating the obstacle, and getting your behind down safely. You get 2 runs, once shortly after you get there on the island and once, in the final weeks. And I remember the first time I tried the confidence course, I was literally frozen stiff with fear. I was able to, gentle coaxing from the drill instructors, I was able to navigate through a couple of obstacles, but I was really, I might as well have, thrown up my heart into my hands. By that last run of the confidence course, and the drill instructors fully expected is, are you gonna be scared? I remember hearing the senior drill instructor booming from the other side of the house, "You're gonna be scared?" And honestly, by the time he yelled, I was already halfway across the obstacle. I was able to get right through it, get right over it without a thought. That lesson definitely proved me well, because throughout my Marine Corps career, I've had to fly into a couple of hot spots, and there's absolutely no time to think about that fear. Like fast roping out of a helicopter, you have no time to think about, oh wow, I'm really high. You just have to think about, let's hit the ground and let's get the job done.
So what do you think changing your mindset from the first time you did that confidence course to the second time you completed that confidence course?
I can say for that type of basic training, what is designed to do is designed to break, really is designed to break you down. It's designed to shatter your conceptions of not only of other people, but mostly of self. Shatter your perception that you can't do this. Shatter your perception that this is impossible, and slowly but surely build you back up. As a matter of fact, one of the other obstacles that you face during training is called the rappel tower. Rappel tower is a 40-foot obstacle. On one side, it's a simulated helo skid, as if you're roping down off the helicopter. One side is just a sheer wall. Again, it was really hard for me at first. I climbed up there, just like in the movies. You're rappelling with a rope, and you have to know your brake, and they go through all that. As a matter of fact, I went down that twice, and then when I hit the ground, my senior drill instructor, who was on the top of the tower, yelled down, it's like, "You still scared of heights?" And And me being the honest person I was, I yelled up, "Yes, sir." And unfortunately, his next response was, "So then get it back up here. You have to do it again." And it's one of those things like, man, sometimes you just keep your mouth shut.
A young person out there wants to join the military in their respective country. I say country because the Tristan Law Show can be heard worldwide, even in space if they have Wi-Fi. So what's the best advice that you would give somebody that wants to join the armed services?
Obviously, it's a physical endeavor, and everyone kind of prepares for that physical endeavor. But if you're trying to keep the whole thing in perspective, it is just as much, if not more so, a mental challenge to get through basic training than the physical. The physical, your body will adapt. Your body will build muscle. You will lose fat. You will get stronger. You will get faster. The body can handle that. It's really the mental gymnastics that you have to do when you are getting pushed and when you think you've reached your limit, you really do not realize you've placed artificial limits on yourself. You really have to shatter that perception that there's no possible way I can do this. And whatever armed services, I'm sure this holds true for American armed services, as it holds for German armed services, as it holds for Spanish armed services. They will show you that your preconceived notions of what your limits are completely wrong.
If you can go back then to the beginning of boot camp and right before you got off that bus, if you can write a letter to yourself, what's the most important advice you would give to yourself to read before you got off that bus?
That's a good question, but I would have to say be prepared for one of the greatest adventures you'll have in your lifetime. Because again, it was not easy. Getting through the whole thing was not easy, but I can say in my young life, I got to see a lot of the world. I got to experience things that not many people do in their entire lifetimes. And while mentally and physically challenging, do I say it was worth it? 100%.
So if you had to do it all over again, you'd do it again?
In a heartbeat.
Even boot camp?
No question. I would rather not. But, if that time clock got reversed and I got put on the yellow footprints again, I have no regrets about it.
What was your favorite country to visit?
That's tough. I visited a lot of countries in my youth. I'm going to give you my top five. I'll give you four in no particular order, and I'll give you my top. My top five: Greece, Italy, Romania, Korea, and honestly, that I put it at number one, but this number one and Italy are kind of neck and neck. Spain was absolutely gorgeous. The architecture was gorgeous. The people were warm. They were very, very friendly, especially when, they realized as much as they kind of tell you to blend in, there's no way with a haircut like this and dress codes that we have in the Marine Corps, you're going to stick out like a damn sore thumb. Mm-hmm. But honestly, the people of Spain, they were very warm, very welcoming, and I loved every minute of it. I spent a Christmas in Spain and a New Year's, and it was a great experience.
That's really cool.
One thing I can tell you about Spanish New Year, obviously in America, we have our traditions as far as New Year's. We have the big countdown.
Right.
A lot of people are usually out partying and whatnot. Not in my experience in Spain. As a matter of fact, the New Year's I did spend in Spain, when we did venture to go out to the local bar for the countdown and all that jazz, we found every bar closed. Mm. And we were actually looking at our watches and we're like, okay, 11:55, entry 3, 2, 1, Happy New Year's, fellas, Happy New Year's. And we're all standing outside the bar. Give it about 5-10 minutes. There's a commotion down the street that's slowly building into a crescendo as it starts getting closer. And as we see it come to fruition, it's obviously the owner of the bar, because he's walking in front of the crowd holding the key, as he has, the key to the kingdom. Right. And what we learned that day was Spaniards, I believe that town was Alicante. Spaniards stay home with their families for the countdown, and after the countdown has ended, then they go out and they have their parties. But it reminded me that, just another reminder, family's important, and every culture handles family in different ways.
What got you into wrestling?
What got me into wrestling as a fan, it's easy to say. What got me into wrestling as a fan was my father. It was a real family thing from when I was knee-high as a child. My father, my two brothers, my sister, and my mother. It was watched faithfully in my household. Even my grandmother was a big fan of wrestling. If you sat next to her watching Antonio Roca, if Antonio was losing, if he was getting a beating, that means whoever was sitting next to her was getting a beating until he started making his comeback. So it was very much a family thing for us. And I remember growing up with the greats, watching Pedro Morales and Paul Orndorff. And, those were the wrestlers I grew up with since a kid. And I honestly never lost my passion for it. I loved it from day one.
Well, who was like your father's favorite wrestler of all time?
That's a tough one. I would probably go between either Pedro
Morales
or Bobo.
Bobo Brazil.
Pedro Morales or Bobo Brazil. He was a big fan of Pedro. And, Pedro is a celebrity in Puerto Rico. And both of my parents were straight from the island, and I believe that my father actually knew some of Pedro's extended family, if I'm not mistaken. He was always a big wrestling fan. Also in the mix, as one of his favorites, and became one of my favorites back in the day, he loved George the Animal Steele. One of his favorites.
Hey, you. Yeah, I'm talking to you. That shirt you're wearing is so not cool. Why don't you head on over to TristanLawShow.com and get yourself a new shirt? Not only will you be cool, but you'll also be supporting the show. What are you waiting for? Go now and get a hat too while you're at it. Thank me later. We're the show at TristanLawShow.com. Okay, so back to you now. Growing up, which wrestlers did you most identify with and why?
Obviously, I loved Pedro. I was a big fan of Orndorff. Just watching him physically, even back then, Orndorff was a physical specimen. When it comes to my family, between my brothers and I am the runt of the litter. I've always been the short guy on the totem pole, but that doesn't mean that, in my family, I learned I had to fight. I had to fight for whatever I had, even for food. My brothers would steal food off my damn plate. And I had to learn to scrap real young. So when I looked at Paul Orndorff, I looked at a physique to idolize, to try to, I wonder if I can do that. Still chasing that, by the way. Chasing that physique. Orndorff, Morales, later on, Kurt Hennig, I thought was phenomenal. Obviously, as a little kid, especially when I started getting a little bit older, I didn't know anyone on my block who was a fan of Hulk Hogan. He was obviously the top. And it's funny because myself and my best friend, we were always the rivals because I was always a big Hogan fan. He was always a Macho Man Savage fan, and we would go at it like cats and dogs. But so many great names back then. It's hard to pick. Even so, obviously Sergeant Slaughter, because later on I did get into that whole big surprise. I was really into G.I. Joe as a child.
I wonder why.
A lot of larger-than-life heroes back then.
What was your favorite match of all time involving Kurt Hennig, Mr. Perfect?
Favorite match of all time involving Kurt Hennig. There's so many. There was matches between him and Texas Tornado, Von Erichs, and him versus Bret Hart. Like, there's no one I could pick out because obviously Kurt was a master of his craft. Along those lines, another name that I failed to mention, who was one of my absolute favorites growing up, because I was a big fan of tag team wrestling growing up. I loved the British Bulldogs. And later when he went single, Davey Boy Smith again, like I was really into a lot of the power guys. When I looked at Davey Boy, I was like, wow, that guy puts the time into the gym.
I remember a couple months ago in the gym when gyms were open. You remember when gyms were open? Yeah, that was the thing back in the day. I remember watching an Intercontinental Championship match between Bret Hart and Mr. Perfect, and I stopped running on the treadmill to take notes because I want to steal the finish. It's in my phone. I want to steal the finish because I said one day I'm going to need a finish, and that's going to be the finish that I have. And when you said Mr. Perfect, I said, I wonder if he really liked the series between Bret Hart and Mr. Perfect, Kurt Hennig, for the Intercontinental Championship. And based on what you said, I 100% know that you do.
Two masters of their craft, really knowing how to work the whole ring, really knowing their own physicality, being able to move the way they did. So some of the stuff they pulled off, it was just astounding. The one thing I liked about Kurt was he really could work. He battled both men his size. You know, he was never the biggest guy in the WWF at that time. But he could still have a great match no matter who was put in front of him. Big, small, he was able to cover the whole thing. And it was always an entertaining fight.
At which moment were you sitting there in your life and you realized that, hey, you know what? That's your kid voice. Hey, you know what? I want to be a pro wrestler.
The moment that I got into the whole battle. And again, I'm going into a couple of the wrestlers that I mentioned. On a little side note, if I mention Pedro Morales, I love Pedro. I love the fire that he had in the ring. Unfortunately, you don't have too many of his classic matches that ever made it to tape, transitioned over into new formats. His passion and the way he got fired up always inspired me. And to speak to your question, as to the one match that said, I really, really want to do this, I would have to say it was the match between Davey Boy and Bret Hart, Wembley Stadium. I believe it was for the Intercontinental title, if I'm not mistaken. And watching that back and forth.
That was SummerSlam 92.
Yes, I believe so.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Davey Boy, no one was going to say Davey Boy was a huge technical wrestler. He was a power guy. Look at him. He's not going to be a huge technical wrestler.
Right.
But I think Bret brought that out in him and was able to bring out the best in Davey Boy. And that match, the emotional roller coaster that match sent me on, was like, wow, I want some of this. I really do.
Do you know the backstory behind that match?
I remember listening to it. It escapes me right now.
Davey Boy Smith had a substance issue back in the day. At that time, he was out of his mind. Probably thought he was sitting like somewhere in Mercury. And when he got to the ring, he was so messed up. Bret Hart carried that entire match. I remember reading that in Bret Hart's book. Like, that was Bret Hart's psychology. Bret Hart took that match and made that match into something, even though Davey Boy Smith, British Bulldog, couldn't remember any of the spots, was probably going to blow all the spots. And that comes to show that the professional that Bret Hart is.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I was always a fan of the Hitman, and he showed it in the ring time and time again how he earned his moniker.
You got into the business in 2015. Is that when you had your first match, or was it when you first started training?
That was when I first started training, and I believe I did have my first match at the end of that year. My memory might be a little fuzzy on it, but I started training it with IWF in 2015. I'm going to say a long time coming, but it was just one of those things where I had let life kind of get, you kind of have these goals that you set, and you're like, I really want to do this. I really want to do this. And then life gets in the way and pushes some goals completely out of your path, pushes some goals completely ahead. But, I still had that desire, and I felt like my body could still handle it. So I did start training at IWF under Kevin Knight.
How did you find Kevin Knight and the IWF school?
That was through, public might know her as the All-Star Michelle D.
I know Michelle D.
Yes, a very good friend.
Yes,
good friend of mine. She had started training there. It was actually a gift by her boyfriend,
Ken Reedy. Good friend of mine as well.
And she started training, and she loved. Obviously, they were both wrestling fans. She pretty much said, "Why don't you guys do this? You guys keep talking about it and talking about it and talking about it." And it was one of those things where Ken looked at me and I looked at him. It was, well, I'll try it if you try it. Okay, I'll try it if you try it. And the rest is history.
So how did you become friends with that fantastic couple? I love the both of them. I haven't seen them since WrestleMania 35 weekend.
Yeah, it's been a while. And the way that we all met each other was honestly through wrestling. I had stopped at my local watering hole as I tend to do from time to time, and they happened to be there having a drink themselves.
Was it the one in Congers?
Yes.
Oh, what's the name of that place? I love that place. They got good hog wings. The Pepper
Mill.
Mill.
The Pepper Mill South.
Yes, I loved it. I used to go there with Nunzio. And
he still goes.
Yep. Oh my God, they got such good food there. That's when I learned how to play quick draw. Nunzio taught me how to play quick draw. Not only did Nunzio teach me how to wrestle and took me on the road and taught me some stuff, I also learned how to play quick draw from Nunzio. A lottery game, yes. But go ahead.
Nunzio, definitely multi-talented.
Yes, good guy as well.
But one night they were at the bar themselves, and they were out through earshot. They were having a wrestling conversation. If you ask me what the conversation was, I probably couldn't tell you. But all I remember is having this fire in my belly about what they were talking about. I was like, well, I'm just going to throw in my 2 cents. And, struck up a conversation on the subject, started talking wrestling, and we found that a lot of our wrestling tastes really aligned. We were in agreement with not everything, but for the most part, we were in agreement. We kind of just struck up a conversation and a friendship from there. And it's like, are you going to be here next whenever? Like, yeah, let's talk wrestling. Let's have a beer. Let's have a bite to eat. Love it. And it just progressed from there.
Yeah, Ken Reedy and Michelle, they're good people. I know that Ken Reedy was the first intern, I believe, for Dave LaGreca when he did Busted Open Radio at Sirius XM. And
yes,
I remember meeting Dave LaGreca at a WWE event when they were closing down the Meadowlands. I had Ken Reedy and I swapped shirts. I gave him one of my shirts, and I took one of his shirts, and I was wearing his shirt, and Dave LaGreca stopped me and goes, "Is that Ken Reedy, like the Ken Reedy show?" I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "How do you know him?" And I told him how I know him, and he was cool. And at that time, I didn't know that Dave LaGreca was like the host of anything. I just thought he was just like a random guy where we had somebody in common. So years go down the line, and I start listening to the show Busted Open on Sirius XM, and I got back onto Twitter because of that, and I started like getting back into the wrestling community. This was kind of before I started getting back into wrestling because I took a hiatus. And then eventually, Dave LaGreca followed me, and I was like, "Oh wow, Dave LaGreca followed me." And then eventually, on another project that I was working on, where I used to do a live radio show, Dave LaGreca actually came in, and he was there, and he talked. He said, "Hey, do you remember me from this?" I said, "Oh wow, that was so long ago." So yeah, like the wrestling world is really small. We all know somebody, and if you ask me, I think that we're all one person removed from knowing Vince McMahon.
Probably, if we actually look into it.
So in pro wrestling school, what was one of the hardest things that you had to learn?
I would probably say was the timing. Physicality, the military prepared me for the physicality. I was never afraid of taking bumps. I was not afraid of jumping off of high places and whatnot. I would say for those people who are not in the know, wrestling is very much a give and take. And
it's a dance.
You can't just take. You really have to learn the dance and make everything flow. Some people are of the opinion if you make it flow too much, it doesn't look right. And I tend to agree, but you do have to have a good sense of timing, or else it's just there's a lot of pain involved.
Your first match was against our mutual friend, Ken Reedy, at IWF's 14th Annual Tournament of Champions, and it ended in a double countout. Pull us behind the curtain. How did this match come to be?
Well, again, Ken and I, we trained together with Kevin. We really put our noses to the grindstone for, a good 6 to 8 weeks right before. We had been training longer, but we had both told ourselves that, look, we really want to take this seriously. We really want to be about it. So we were training almost every day. At that show, Kevin comes up to us. He's like, "Guys, you're in, and you're fighting each other." And we're both like, okay. Because at that time, if I remember correctly, the only instructions were keep it basic and here's the finish. Just do what you know. So that was our direction. You know, there were obviously butterflies on both sides. We went out there. We had a match. We did what we knew. As I look at that match in retrospect, if you're going to talk about it on a technical level, well, we were absolute crap. But the crowd really got into it. They really got behind it. And as I tell a lot of young guys, especially like after their matches when they're asking for critiques, my first question is always this: well, how did the crowd like? You know, how did the crowd like it?
Boom.
Did the crowd react? You know, if the crowd reacted, because I've seen more than one guy be really hard on himself and be really, you know, I didn't get this sequence right. Or look, did the crowd buy it? Yep. Then don't kill yourself about it. It was an interesting night, and we had the crowd, so that I can be happy in that.
What a lot of people, Cash, don't understand that are not in the wrestling business is that when you go out there and your music plays and you go out there and you get that desired reaction, whether it's a boo or a cheer from the people that paid their hard-earned money to watch you perform, it's a high. And when you go out there and you're working in the match and you're getting that desired reaction that you want in the match, whether it's a boo or a cheer, depending on what part of the match that you are in, it's a high. But if you don't get that, and when you leave and you feel like that was the worst match ever, it can easily make you rethink your career. Because there's been plenty of times I'm like, dude, why am I doing this? Why am I beating myself up and killing myself for these people? Then, you know, I go out there, put on my big boy pants, and then I go out there and I work hard. And the next match I go through, I get that high again. And I always tell guys, the newer guys, you're only as good as your last match. Because once that next match happens and it's terrible, nobody cares about that last match. So, you know, always try your best to go out there and put on a best performance. Take your time, work. But again, like you said, what does the crowd think? If the crowd likes it, don't beat yourself up too much. I like that. I liked it a lot. I want you to go back into a time machine. My favorite movie is Back to the Future. It's the DeLorean, flux capacitor. Okay. That's what makes time travel possible. So if you can go back to that night in 2015 when you had your first match, stop yourself right before you go through the curtain, even though you're not supposed to meet yourself in like time travel because you'll mess up alternate universes.
Yeah, all that paradoxy stuff.
So if you can go back and tell yourself one thing before you went through the curtain on your first match between Ken Reedy, what would you tell yourself?
Don't worry about it. You'll do fine. You're standing behind the curtain. You're wondering what's going to happen. And especially at the time, Ken was playing the face. Me and all my niceness, I was the dastardly heel. Honestly, my biggest worry, because, you know, from very early on in my wrestling career, I was in the military. I made no bones about it. I was going to be a Marine. Either I was going to be hated or loved. In this case, I was hoping to be hated. And when I'll never forget when I first stepped through the curtain, I saw the looks on people's faces, and they were like, this is a Marine. This is a military guy. We got to cheer for him.
Right.
I think it was those first 3 words. I called everyone to attention in my best drill instructor voice, and I demanded that everyone stand up and show me some respect. I saw the looks on the crowd's faces. I saw it snap instantly, and I was like, yes. Uh-huh. Yes, thank God, because I did not want them to cheer. Because, you know, Kevin is very, very traditional.
Right, he's very old school.
He's very old school. One thing I liked about IWF, very old school. You know, the heels go first. So it was the impression. So I was going to set that tone, and if I didn't set the tone right, my immediate next thought, if I didn't set the tone right, I was going to make Ken's job that much harder.
Right.
And I really didn't want to do that to him. So as soon as I stepped through the curtain, and then with the drill instructor voice, I saw the crowd turn, and I was like, internally I breathed a sigh of relief. Like, all right. So when Ken came out, he got the appropriate reaction. So right then and there in my head, I was like, all right, you're on the right track.
How did you come up with the Sgt Cash gimmick?
The Sgt Cash gimmick, that's a funny little anecdote, again, based in my military experience. For full disclosure, for everyone who doesn't know, I had 3 tours overseas, 2 of those being combat tours, 1 in Kosovo, 1 in Iraq. In Iraq, my job was, as a communications Marine. I was making sure that we can speak from, A to B, wherever you're talking. If you need to talk, I get you there. As one learns through the boredom that sometimes befalls you when you're overseas, people will play stupid bets on anything.
Such as, for example, what's one of the dumbest bets?
I wouldn't even call it dumb. It was just infantile bet that if Marines in the field, we have our meals called MREs, meals ready to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And in every MRE, there is a bottle of hot sauce. And I remember being in a fighting hole with one of my guys, and it was hot. It was a long day, and it was chow time. And we break open our MREs. He flips me his bottle of hot sauce. And he's like, "You drink those 2 bottles. I bet you a 6-pack of beer you won't drink those 2 bottles." 6-pack of beer? Free 6-pack of beer. Fine. Slam 2. Now, mind you, this is in almost triple-digit heat, and I'm like, I'm down in water. Like, I got beer after this. I'm fine. I had garnered a reputation for being rather lucky. I also garnered a reputation that, for people who said, he can't do that. I bet you $10 he can do it.
So people used to place bets on you all the time.
Oh, yeah. He's as good as Cash. I'm like, okay, well, there you go. Put your money down. I guarantee you. So, it evolved from that. And honestly, it's something that I carried on from the get-go, that it just came out of nowhere.
Who is Sgt Cash?
A Marine veteran. Sgt Cash is always looking for the next challenge. He's always looking to prove himself, as he's always been bet against. He's always been the guy no one thinks can get the job done until he gets the job done. And then people start to stand up and take notice. I've always been used to being the underdog. I've always been used to being the guy that gets discounted, and that's just fine. I'll fight harder than most. And for my size, I can definitely say I can be one tough son of a bitch.
What do you want to achieve in pro wrestling?
I just want to be known as one hell of a fighter. I want to be known as a guy that when the pressure is on, I am able to perform. I'm able to get the job done. I want to be recognized for being tough and being a proficient fighter, a proficient wrestler. Most of all, I want to be entertaining.
What is next for Sgt Cash?
Well, COVID definitely threw a lot of my next plans in disarray. As far as what I can feasibly see in the near future, as soon as we get out of these lockdowns, as soon as we get out, I'm on track for whatever federation is willing to give me an opportunity, be it in singles, be it in tags. I'm appreciable to either format. I love tag team wrestling. I love singles wrestling. As far as what's next, I'm going to be in contact with several promotions, and I'm just looking for the next shot.
So if Cody Rhodes or Vince McMahon or, anybody, Tommy Dreamer, anybody that's affiliated with any top tier professional wrestling company is listening right now, what makes Sgt Cash a good asset to their professional wrestling organization?
My dedication and my discipline. Obviously, one thing that the Corps instills in you is a very strong sense of discipline, very strong sense of getting the job done no matter what it takes. Also along those lines, again, with everything going on in the world, not only with COVID, with the state of racism in the world, with the state of, we can have conversations on police brutality, we can have conversations on discrimination, plenty of things that people can point to the world at what's wrong. To be honest, I like to try to point out that while there are problems, I like to personify and I like to show that there is hope. And if there's one word that I would like to think that I would personify in character, it would be hope. That is what I would bring to a wrestling company.
Cash, it was good having you here. I mean, it was so cool learning about all the stuff in the military. Like I said, there's a lot of things that I didn't know because, I never had firsthand experience, but I appreciate the time that you've given me today to sit down and talk with you. But tell everybody, all the listeners of the Tristan Law Show, how they can find you outside of the Tristan Law Show.
Well, outside of the Tristan Law Show, you can find me on Facebook. I have my page, Sgt Cash. You can find me on Instagram at the Sgt Cash, and also on Twitter at the Sgt Cash. And anyway, my fans want to reach out to me, I am more than accessible. I'm more than willing to have a conversation. And more importantly, any wrestling promotions out there that want to get in touch with me, you can also email me at thesrtcash@gmail.com.
Hey, well, you know what? I don't believe that I follow you on Twitter and Instagram, and I'm going to go ahead and give you a follow right now. But, listeners, this was Sgt Cash, and I want you to stay tuned after the break, because when I get back, I'm going to tell you exactly my thoughts of this whole conversation, and I'm going to tell you who's going to be here next week with me on The Tristan Law Show. Hey there, it's your pal Tristan Law. Do you find yourself skipping past these evil advertisements every week? Well, you should feel lucky to skip past this one, because I have the solution for you. Run on over to patreon.com/Tristan Law Show and free yourself from the evil grip of advertisements. Choosing the ad-free support option, not only will every episode be ad-free, but you'll get every episode days earlier. But if you love the ads here in the Tristan Law Show, there's an option on Patreon to simply support the podcast. There's something here for everyone. Head on over to TristanLawShow.com for more info. Welcome back to the Tristan Law Show, and I hope that you're having a great time. I'm looking for more bands and brands to work with. We can play your music or advertise for your band or brand. No one is too big and no one is too small. Visit the contact form at TristanLawShow.com or send an email directly to TristanLawShow@gmail.com. Did you enjoy my chat with Sgt Cash? Shout out to our mutual friends Ken Reedy and Michelle D. I did not know that we were mutual friends until Cash and I talked. See what happens when you ask the right questions? I really like those two and can't wait to see them again in person. But here's the question. Are you one of the few who have stood on the yellow feet? In other branches of the military, is there something like the yellow feet, like the Marines have? Tell me. Tag me at The Real Big Tris on Instagram or Twitter, or tag the show on Instagram and Twitter at Tristan Show. Make your account unprivate prior to tagging, or we won't see it. American Thanksgiving is coming, but I want you to know I have something special for you that week. However, 1 week prior, that's next episode. For those of you guys keeping track, I will bring you episode 16, and joining me will be female pro wrestling star, Gabby Ortiz. I need a favor from you. Yep, I'm talking to you. Share this episode on social media. Don't make this the thing that you do. Let's make this the thing that we do. Walk up to a random stranger and tell them to listen to the Tristan Law Show. Yeah, they might think that you're crazy, but who cares what other people think? Fine. If you're worried about being judged, go on over to TristanLawShow.com and at least buy a t-shirt. People will think that you're really cool. Rate the Tristan Law Show 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and leave a review, please. Reviews mean a lot. Whichever podcast platform you're using to listen, please subscribe to get notified when new episodes drop. The best part is that it's free. Learn about myself and the Tristan Law Show by typing TristanLawShow.com in your internet-enabled device for more info. I'll be waiting for you next week. I'm Tristan Law, and until next time, adios.